7 days until the zombie apocalypse. Here's what I did. I keep starting this and then deleting it. Not because I don't know what to say. I know exactly what to say. I've been turning it over in my head for so long that the words are basically worn smooth by now, like river stones. The problem is, I don't know who I'm saying it to. And that matters to me in a way I can't fully explain. So let's just say I'm talking to you, whoever you are. If you found this drive, if you found this recording, if somehow this entire mess of notes and audio files and half-finished documents makes it out of here intact, then hi. My name is Owen Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I'm sitting in a farmhouse about 40 miles outside of Columbus, Ohio, and there are approximately 11 of us still alive in this building. I used to be a data analyst. I know. Exciting, right? I want to be clear about something before I get into any of it. I'm not telling you this story because I want credit. I'm not doing this because I think I was some kind of hero. I made mistakes. I was wrong about things. People got hurt because of calls I made. I'm going to tell you all of that too. I'm doing this because I found a document that the government tried to bury. And the document was right, and I need someone to understand that it existed, that people knew. That 7 days before cities started burning, somebody in a federal office building sat down and wrote a 47-page report predicting almost exactly what happened. And then that report sat in a folder on a secure server that wasn't quite as secure as they thought. I found it on a Tuesday. Okay, let me back up. My job at the time, and I say at the time, because I don't think my employer exists anymore, which is a genuinely strange sentence to say out loud, was at a mid-size analytics firm called Hartwell & Bryce. We did data work for corporate clients mostly, pharmaceutical companies, insurance groups, logistics firms, dry stuff. The kind of work that pays well and photographs badly. My specific role was trend analysis and anomaly detection. I spent my days looking at datasets and finding the things that didn't fit the pattern. That's important. Remember that. Finding the things that don't fit. I was good at it. Not in a braggy way, just factually. I had a decent track record. My clients liked me. My manager liked me in that vague, distracted way that managers like reliable employees who don't need much managing. I had a routine. Wake up, coffee, 30-minute commute in my 2019 Civic that always smelled faintly of old gym bag no matter how many times I cleaned it. Sit at my desk, open 3 monitors, and start finding the things that didn't fit. I was not the kind of person who found government conspiracies. I want to be very clear about that. I was not a conspiracy guy. I didn't have Reddit tabs open to survivalist forums. I didn't stockpile anything. My apartment in Columbus had exactly 2 weeks of food at any given time. And that was just because I hated grocery shopping and did big runs. I ate a lot of pasta. I had plants that I mostly remembered to water. Normal. Everything about my life was normal. And then on a Tuesday in October, I was doing a routine data pull for a client. I can't tell you which client because it doesn't matter anymore, but also because old habits. And I hit a file path that wasn't mine. That happens sometimes. Shared drives get messy, permissions get misconfigured, files end up in wrong folders. I would have just backed out, except the folder was named something that caught my eye. I'm a person who notices things. That's the job. The folder was labeled Prog Echo Pathogen Response Modeling Do Not Distribute. I stared at that for a second. Do not distribute. I mean, you can't write Do Not Distribute in a folder name and expect a data analyst to not open it. That's not how humans work. I opened it. There were 47 pages. The document was dated 8 weeks before that Tuesday. It was authored by something called the Office of Emergency Preparedness Modeling, which I had never heard of, and it was addressed to 3 people I also didn't recognize. The executive summary was 1 page long, and I read it in about 4 minutes. And then I sat very still at my desk for a while. The summary said, in the dry, bloodless language of government reports, that there was a 73.4% probability of a novel pathogen event originating in the Midwest region of the United States within the following 90 days. It said the pathogen, based on genetic modeling from samples acquired through undisclosed channels, would exhibit characteristic never seen in clinical literature, specifically extreme aggression in infected hosts, rapid neurological degradation, and an infection vector that included both fluid contact and, in advanced cases, aerosol proximity. It said that projected mortality in an uncontrolled spread scenario, defined as a scenario where containment failed within the first 72 hours, was between 60 and 80% of the affected population within 90 days. Then there were 46 more pages of models, maps, probability trees, epidemiological curves, and resource allocation recommendations. I read all 46 pages. It took me 2 hours. My lunch went cold. I ignored 3 Slack messages from my manager asking about the quarterly variance report. I was supposed to be finishing. Here is the thing about reading a document like that with the brain I have. I couldn't stop checking the methodology. That's the first instinct. You see a scary number, and you go straight to how they got there, because scary numbers are usually wrong. Data gets tortured. Models get overfit. Whoever wrote this thing had every reason to want their worst-case scenario to look plausible. That's how you justify budget requests. That's how you get funding. That's how government offices prove their own necessity. So I went looking for the errors, and I found some small ones, a few assumptions I would have made differently. One epidemiological curve that seemed slightly aggressive, but the core model, the transmission rates, the neurological cascade progression, the geographic spread projection, it was solid. Not just solid, it was careful. Whoever wrote this had done real work. The genetic modeling section alone referenced 11 separate peer-reviewed papers, all of them recent. By the time I finished, it was nearly 4 in the afternoon. I closed the document, went back to my actual work, finished the quarterly variance report, sent it to my manager, said goodbye to the 2 colleagues I passed on the way out, drove home, made pasta, watered 2 of my 3 plants. And then I lay in bed for 3 hours staring at the ceiling. Because here's the thing, the report predicted a specific window. Not a vague within the coming months. A specific window, based on the genetic modeling and the pathogen staging data. I won't pretend I understood all of it. Some of it was well outside my field. The report estimated the first uncontrolled spread event would occur between 85 and 95 days from the document's date. The document was dated 8 weeks before that Tuesday. That meant the window was somewhere between 1 and 3 weeks away. I lay there and I thought, this is someone's very elaborate, very well-funded worst-case scenario planning document, and it's going to be wrong. And then I thought, but what if it's not? And that second thought, I couldn't get rid of it. It was in there. It had weight. I am a person whose entire professional value comes from my ability to look at a data set and tell you what's real and what's noise. I had just spent 2 hours running a government pathogen report. Through the same mental process, I apply to pharmaceutical trial data and logistics optimization models. And my honest assessment, the same honest assessment I would give to a paying client, was that the data supported the conclusion. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning I called in sick. First time in 8 months. My manager texted back, "Feel better," with a little emoji that I didn't look at. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and 2 cups of coffee, and I started building a decision tree. That's my process. When I have a problem I can't solve by staring at it, I put it in a structure. Decision trees, probability matrices, risk assessment tables. My apartment was not the place most people would go to think through an existential crisis. It had a coffee table I'd bought on Facebook Marketplace and a bookshelf that was mostly data science textbooks and a window that looked out at a parking garage. Not inspiring. But I had what I needed. Quiet, coffee, and 3 screens. The question at the top of the tree was, do I act on this document? And the branches were simple. 2 possibilities. The document is correct, or the document is wrong. If the document is wrong and I act on it, I lose some money. I look like an idiot to anyone paying attention, and I probably have a slightly embarrassing few weeks. If the document is correct and I don't act on it, I'm dead. Or worse, if the document is correct and I act on it, I might not be dead. I'm giving you the cleaned-up version of this decision process. The actual spreadsheet was messier. There were a lot of sub-branches about degree of probability and what acting on it actually meant and how to even verify something like this. But when I collapsed it down to the core question, it was pretty simple math. The expected cost of preparing for something that doesn't happen, low. The expected cost of not preparing for something that does, very high. That's not bravery. That's just expected value. I started making a list. The first thing I needed to do was verify the document. Not fully. I didn't have the tools for that, and I wasn't about to start calling federal offices asking about their pathogen modeling programs. But I could check the peripheral stuff. The 11 peer-reviewed papers cited in the genetics section, were they real? Were they saying what the report claimed they were saying? Was there any public-facing research in that area that might corroborate the direction of this? I spent 4 hours on that Tuesday going through academic databases. The papers were all real, every single one, and the citations were accurate. The report wasn't misrepresenting what the paper said, which is the most common way these things go wrong when someone's trying to make data tell a particular story. More than that, I found 2 papers published after the report's date that seemed to be moving in the same direction, which meant whatever the report's authors had been tracking. The peer-reviewed community was starting to find the edges of it too. I also found something else. 3 separate epidemiology blogs, not news sites, not forums. Actual working epidemiologists writing about their work had posted in the past month about a cluster of cases in 3 Midwest cities that didn't fit any known disease profile. The posts were cautious, academic, not alarmed. But they were there. And when I mapped the geographic locations against the report's projected origin points, they matched. Not roughly, exactly. I closed my laptop at around 2 in the afternoon, went to my bathroom, and stood over the jig for a minute. Then I came back, opened the laptop, and started the next list. The list was titled, What I Actually Need to Do. I wasn't panicking. I want to be clear about that. Panic is noise. I've seen people panic in the middle of data crises at work. A system goes down. A critical report is wrong. A client finds an error right before a board meeting. And what panic does is make everything slower and louder and less solvable. I don't have a great poker face for most things, but I can sit inside a bad problem without screaming. What I was doing was something quieter and worse than panic. I was doing the math, and the math kept coming out the same way. Okay. The list: food and water, medication, physical security, communication. A location that wasn't my apartment on the 4th floor of a building with 300 other people. That last one was the first real wall I hit. I didn't own property. I rented a 740 square foot apartment. I had no country relatives with a farm I could descend on. My parents were in a suburb of Cleveland. My mom's place was a split level in a neighborhood with no land and no strategic value whatsoever. My dad had been dead for 6 years. I sat with that problem for a while. Then I thought of Darren. Darren Hollis was my father's college roommate. He was not exactly family, but he'd been at every Callaway gathering for as long as I could remember. Thanksgiving, the occasional Christmas, my high school graduation. He was 67, recently retired from a civil engineering career, and he owned 40 acres of farmland outside of Granville, Ohio, which he had inherited from his own father. and ran with the kind of mild enthusiasm of someone who liked the idea of farming more than the actual practice. He had chickens, he had a wood stove, he had a well, he had a barn. I hadn't spoken to Darren in almost 2 years. I called him. He answered on the third ring, which felt like a miracle. Owen? Jesus, is everything all right? Yeah, everything's fine. I have kind of a weird question. Shoot. I had rehearsed a cover story on the drive over in my head, something about wanting to do a rural photography project, or needing to get out of the city for a bit, or any of the dozen plausible reasons a 31-year-old city person might want to spend time on a farm. But when I actually heard his voice, the cover story felt thin and exhausting. I found something at work, I said. I'm not going to get into all of it, but I think there might be something bad coming. Like, really bad. Public health level bad. And I'm trying to figure out if I could use your property, the farmhouse, as a kind of base. Silence. How bad? He said. I don't know. Bad enough that I'm calling you about it, and I'm not the kind of person who calls people about things. Another silence, shorter this time. You always were your father's kid, he said, which I took as a yes. He didn't ask me to explain more on the phone. He said he'd check on the farmhouse. He didn't live there full time. He still had a house in town. And let me know if there were things that needed fixing. I told him I'd come out that weekend. That was day -6. Day -6 was a Wednesday, and I went back to work. This part is strange to explain. I went back to work, sat at my desk, pulled my datasets, talked to colleagues, attended a 10 a.m. meeting about third quarter projections. I ate lunch in the office cafeteria. I said things like, yeah, it's going to be a busy month, and the Hennings account is going to need a full re-poll. And the whole time, underneath that, I was running the other list. Because here's what I understood from spending 2 hours in my head the night before. If I had 1 week, roughly, I couldn't go loud. I couldn't walk into work and say, hey, I found a classified government document and we're all going to die. That accomplishes nothing except getting me fired and possibly investigated and definitely not taken seriously. I'd seen how people respond to outlier information. I worked in data. People dismiss the outliers. That's the first instinct. Regression to the mean. Discard the anomaly and trust the trend. I had to work around that. So I started building the second thing I was good at, a quiet parallel project. At work, I had access to corporate procurement systems, which meant I could order things. Not personal things, obviously, but I had supplier contacts from years of working with logistics clients, and I knew which supply chains moved fast. I started identifying what I needed and finding the fastest, quietest ways to get it. That sounds more organized than it was. The reality was, I was taking notes in a personal notebook I'd bought from the CVS across from the office, in handwriting small enough that nobody leaning over my shoulder would read it, and I kept having to stop mid-sentence to respond to work emails. My hands were slightly unsteady for most of that first day back. Not shaking, just not quite right. The list, as I had it by end of that Wednesday, water filtration. I couldn't rely on the farmhouse well being uncontaminated. Needed portable filtration units and storage containers. Food, shelf-stable, calorie-dense, enough for at least 60 days for one person. More if I was going to bring anyone. Medical, antibiotics, wound care, basic surgery supply, over-the-counter essentials, prescription refills if I could get them. Tools, hand tools primarily, because power is a liability when infrastructure fails. Saws, hammers, crowbars, a generator as backup. Defense. This one was the item I circled and kept coming back to. I didn't own a firearm. I didn't particularly want to own a firearm, but I also wasn't naive about what a societal collapse looks like and what it does to the ratio of desperate people to available resources. Communication, battery-powered radio receivers, a hand crank unit if possible, a shortwave if I could get one. Light, lanterns, headlamps, a significant amount of batteries. I looked at the list. Then I looked at my bank account. I had about $14,000 in savings. I didn't have debts except my student loan, which I paid every month, and had about 2 years left on. My rent was $1,150 a month. I did a rough estimate on the list. About $6,000 minimum for everything at the quality and quantity I was thinking. More if I was serious about the medical supplies. A lot more if I wanted to do this right. And here's the thing. Here's where it got complicated. Because that much money, spent in that specific pattern, in that specific compressed time frame, that's a visible purchase history. Banks flag unusual spending. And I didn't know who had access to that document I'd found, or who might be watching for exactly the kind of person who'd found it and started acting on it. I might be being paranoid. I probably was. But I'd also just spent 2 hours verifying a government document that said most people alive right now were going to be dead in 3 months. So my calibration on what constitutes reasonable caution was a little scrambled. I split the purchases across 3 different payment methods. My main debit, a credit card I barely used, and cash, which meant ATM trips every day for the next 6 days at my daily withdrawal limit, which was $500. It took me another hour to map out the purchase schedule, so nothing looked out of pattern for any single account. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. Not when I found the document, not when I verified the citations. This moment, sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from my office, working out how to buy emergency supplies without triggering a fraud alert, this was when it stopped being an intellectual exercise. This was when it became real. Day -5, Thursday. I took my lunch break and went to an outdoor supply store 3 miles from the office. Paid cash for 2 water filtration systems, the kind backpackers use, portable, gravity-fed, and 4 large-capacity food storage containers with airtight lids. I told the cashier I was doing a camping trip. She said, "Cool, have fun." I put everything in the trunk of my car. After work, I went to Costco. I bought rice, dried beans, canned goods, protein bars, instant oatmeal, cooking oil, salt, sugar, powdered milk. I spent $400 on food. I packed everything into the containers in the parking garage that night. My car smelled like a warehouse. I got home, made dinner, called my mom. She wanted to know if I was coming for Thanksgiving. I said, of course. I asked how she was. She asked how work was. I said, fine, busy, the usual. She said I sounded weird, and I said I was just tired. When we hung up, I thought, I need to tell her. And then I thought, tell her what? That I found a document. That I think it's real. That I need her to what, exactly? Pack up her house? Drive 40 miles to a farm she's never been to with a man she vaguely remembers from my dad's funeral? She'd call someone. A friend, or my Aunt Linda, who was a nurse and extremely sensible. And that would become a conversation I didn't have the energy for and couldn't afford in terms of time. I didn't call her back. I've thought about that a lot since. There is a specific kind of guilt that comes from being right about something terrible. It's not clean. It's not even satisfying in the dark way that some part of you might expect it to be. That, well, I told you so feeling. It's mostly just a grinding awareness that you had more information than someone you loved and you didn't give it to them because the mechanism for delivering that information was too complicated and too uncertain and too potentially embarrassing. I didn't call her back. The farmhouse was 40 miles away. She was 80 miles in the opposite direction. I put it in the back of my head and kept moving. Day -5, later, Thursday evening. I looked into firearms. I had never owned one. I'd fired one twice in my life. A .22 rifle at my uncle's property when I was 14 purely for the experience, and never again. Ohio has no waiting period for handgun purchases, which I looked up on my phone in the parking lot of Costco. You need a background check, which happens in real time. A few minutes usually. I drove to a gun shop on the east side of Columbus. It was a Tuesday. No, Thursday. I keep getting the days tangled. The place smelled like gun oil and carpet cleaner. The guy behind the counter was named Keith, based on the name tag, and he was maybe 45, patient. Didn't talk down to me the way I'd half expected. I told him I was looking for something for home protection, first purchase, not sure where to start. He asked about my living situation. I said I was thinking about spending more time at a rural property. He nodded and steered me toward two options: a 9mm semi-automatic pistol and a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. I bought both. Background check took 7 minutes. I also bought 500 rounds of 9mm and 100 shells for the shotgun. Keith gave me a brief, professionally careful look when I said those numbers. I said I was planning to practice. He packed everything up, and I put it in the trunk, next to the food storage containers and the water filtration systems, covered it with a gym bag, and drove home. I sat in the parking garage for about 10 minutes before going upstairs. I was not someone who bought guns. I was not someone who had this many supplies in his car. I was not someone who spent his lunch breaks in outdoor supply stores, buying emergency equipment, and his evenings doing parallel financial transactions designed not to flag algorithms. Except now I was all of those things. Day minus Fowler, Friday. I went into the office, had a meeting, said the right things, responded to emails. My manager, a very competent man named Gary who wore the same 3 shirt styles in rotation and ran excellent Wednesday meetings, pulled me aside mid-afternoon and asked if I was all right. "You've been, I don't know, you seem distracted. Just some personal stuff," I said. "Not a big deal. I'll be back to normal by next week." He nodded. He was a kind person in an undemonstrative way. He told me to let him know if I needed anything. I said I would. I thought about Gary a lot afterward. He'd been at the company for 12 years. He drove a nice car. He had a daughter in college and a wife he talked about with genuine warmth. He had no reason to doubt anything. He had every reason to be exactly where he was. I hoped he'd made it somewhere safe when it started. I don't know if he did. After work Friday, I drove out to the Granville farmhouse for the first time since I was a kid. It was about a 50-minute drive east on 40, then north on county roads. The leaves were turning. I'd forgotten how different the light is out in that part of Ohio. The sky is actually visible, not just a strip between buildings and highway overpasses. The fields had that dried-out late-season look, harvested corn stubble, some winter wheat coming up in low green rows. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel driveway about a quarter-mile off the road. 2-story, wood frame, white with green shutters that had faded to gray-green. A wraparound porch that needed work. A big red barn behind it, newer looking than the house. A chicken coop off to the left, currently empty. Darren had sold the chickens when his wife Elaine died 2 years ago and hadn't gotten more. Darren was waiting on the porch. He had a coffee. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner, maybe. Gray beard he hadn't had before. He handed me a coffee when I got to the porch, and we stood there for a minute without saying much. "Tell me what you found," he said. I told him. Not everything. I didn't tell him about the document specifically. Didn't want to get into how I'd accessed a file that wasn't mine to access. I told him I'd been doing analysis work that touched on a public health data set, that I'd found modeling that suggested something serious was potentially inbound, and that I thought the timeline was short. A week to 2 weeks. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Pathogen," he said. "Yeah. And these people who made the model, they're not issuing any public warning. Not as far as I can tell." Another silence. A crow landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard and looked at us. Elaine used to say, "I was the kind of person who believed in having a plan for things," Darren said. She was right. I've always got 3 months of food out here. Just habit. The well's clean. I had it tested in August. The wood stove works. I use it every winter. Generators in the barn, needs a fuel run, but it works. The barn's solid. House needs some weather stripping. He looked at me. What do you need? He said. God, I like Darren. I need to reinforce the house, I said. Windows and doors, mostly. I need you to stay here if you're willing. And I need to tell 2 people who I trust. Who? I had thought about this. Specifically, my friend Pete. He's a nurse. And my neighbor Gretchen, she used to do logistics for a construction company. She's practical. She wouldn't panic. Darren looked out at the field. That's a short list, he said. I know. What about your mother? I didn't answer right away. She's in Cleveland, I finally said, 80 miles the other direction. If I'm wrong about this, I've scared her for nothing. If I'm right, I stopped. If I'm right, I need to get her out here before things start. And I will. I just need a couple more days to figure out how to say it. Darren nodded. He didn't push it. We spent 3 hours walking the property that afternoon. I made notes. Darren showed me the well pump, the generator, the septic system. The barn had a loft full of old equipment and would serve as a secondary shelter if needed. The property had a natural perimeter on 2 sides. A shallow creek to the north, a tree line to the east that separated it from the neighboring farm. The gravel driveway was the main approach. I asked Darren if he had a chainsaw. He did. I asked about fertilizer and fuel stores. He had about 30 gallons of diesel for the old tractor and a half rack of propane for the outdoor grill. Not enough, but workable. We made a list. Before I drove back to Columbus that night, I stood at the edge of the porch and looked at the property in the dark. The sky had a lot of stars. I could hear the creek from there, just barely, a low steady sound under the wind, I thought. If I'm wrong, this is a very expensive and embarrassing week. I thought, if I'm right, this is where some of us survive. I drove back. Day -3, Saturday, I called Pete. Peter Voss was my best friend since college. We'd roomed together for 2 years at OSU. He'd gone into nursing, ER, specifically, which takes a particular kind of person, and Pete was exactly that kind, the type who gets calmer when things get worse. He was 32, same as me. He worked shifts at Grant Medical Center downtown, which meant his schedule was all over the place. And he was chronically tired. He had a dark sense of humor about most things, including patients, including the healthcare system, including himself. He was the most competent person I knew. He answered on the second ring, sounding slightly asleep. "What time is it?" he said. 8:30. That's not real time yet. "I need to talk to you about something. It's important. Important like you need help moving, or important like maybe the most important conversation you'll have this year." Silence. "Okay," he said. "Give me 10 minutes, I need coffee." When he called back, I told him everything. The document, the verification, the epidemiology posts, the timeline. I read him sections of the executive summary from memory. I'd memorized most of it, which is probably a sign of something, though I'm not sure what. He didn't interrupt much. He asked a few very specific questions about the pathogen characteristics, the neurological component, the transmission vector, the latency period, nurse brain, going straight to the clinical mechanics. When I finished, there was a long pause. "The aggression component," he said. "What's the mechanism?" They don't fully explain it in the report. They reference a neurological cascade, but the details are in a supplemental file I didn't see. Based on the papers they cite, I think it's a prion-adjacent effect, something that hits the prefrontal cortex and strips out impulse, inhibition. So they lose higher-order behavior. That's what I'm inferring. Yeah. Another pause. "The infection vector, you said advanced cases can aerosolize." "That's what the report says. I think proximity-based, not long-range, within a few feet of an advanced host." "Jesus," Pete said quietly, not panicked, just absorbing it. "Yeah. How confident are you in the methodology?" Genuinely. I'd been waiting for that question. "If this was a client report," I said, I would tell them the confidence interval on the 73% projection is probably plus minus 15%. The core mechanics of the model are solid. The timeline is the shakiest part. Biological timelines are harder to pin than economic ones. But the direction, I'm confident in the direction, meaning something happens. Meaning something happens. And based on the peripheral corroboration I found, the blog posts, the cluster data, I think it's closer to the early end of their window than the late end. I heard him exhale. Okay, he said, what do I need to do? That was Pete. No hysteria, just, what do I need to do? I told him about the farmhouse. I told him what I needed from him specifically. His medical knowledge and whatever supplies he could access or purchase. I gave him the list of medications to prioritize, and told him to be careful about how he acquired anything that might seem unusual in quantity. I can get some of this through the hospital, he said slowly. Not stealing, just, there are things that are technically available. Outdated stock, surplus. I know where that stuff goes. Don't get yourself fired. I'm a nurse, Owen. Getting fired is like a hobby for us. I gave him the address of the farmhouse. He said he'd be there by Sunday evening. Then I called Gretchen. Gretchen Alderman was my neighbor in the apartment building. We'd become friends in that particular way of neighbors who are both introverts. A friendship built on elevator conversations and occasional shared complaints about the building's heating system that somehow over 2 years had become something you'd actually call friendship. She was 35, had been laid off from her logistics job about 8 months ago, and had been freelancing since, doing supply chain consulting. She had a no-nonsense approach to most things that I found reassuring. She'd grown up on a farm in Indiana. She answered immediately. Owen, what's up? I gave her the same version I'd given Pete, slightly less technical. She was quiet for a while. You're not crazy, she said eventually, which was not what I'd expected. I'm glad you think so. No, I mean, I've been seeing some weird stuff. In supply chain data, my clients have been getting unusual queries about stockpiling. Government orders through third-party channels. I thought it was COVID-adjacent PTSD, like agencies getting jumpy. But the pattern is specific. I sat up. What kind of pattern? Large orders of shelf-stable food. Medical supply chain queries for things that would be useful in a long-term lockdown scenario. But the weird part is the geography. It's all concentrated in specific corridors, like someone is quietly pre-positioning supplies in specific locations. I wrote that down. That fits with the report, I said. There's a whole section on pre-positioning. They were recommending it, so someone is following the recommendations, she said, and not making any public announcement. Another pause. I have a car, she said. What do you need me to bring? Day -3 continued. After the calls, I made one more trip, this time to a hardware store, a big one, the kind with a lumber section, not the neighborhood kind. I bought a significant amount of plywood, 2x4s, screws, hinges, and 2 additional deadbolt sets, 2 crowbars, 3 sledgehammers, rolls of heavy-gauge wire, chain and padlocks. The total was $680, and I had to rent a pickup from the Home Depot next door to haul it, because there was no way this was fitting in a Civic. I drove it out to the farmhouse that afternoon. Darren was there. We spent the rest of the day measuring windows and cutting plywood. The farmhouse had 11 windows on the ground floor. We didn't cover all of them. You need to be able to see out. You need some daylight for morale. But we covered the ones on the most accessible sides of the house, with interior shutters on swivel pins that could be closed and locked from inside. You could see out through an inch gap at the top. Enough. We reinforced the front back doors with steel bar brackets, the kind that fit into floor-mounted slots so you can drop a 2x4 across the door. Old technology. Works fine. We blocked the crawl space vents with wire mesh. We checked every window latch, fixed 3 that didn't close properly. We talked while we worked. Not much, just the occasional practical exchange. Darren handed me things without being asked, which is the sign of someone who knows how to work alongside another person. He grew up building things. I grew up in a suburb. At one point he stopped and looked at what we were doing. All the wood, the locks, the methodical fortifying, and he said, very quietly, "I hope to God you're wrong about this, Owen." "Me too," I said. "But just in case, I'm going to get my rifle out of the gun cabinet." He had a bolt-action .3006 that had belonged to his father. He also had a 20-gauge bird gun and a .22 rifle for pest control. Not an arsenal, but not nothing. We ate dinner on the porch. Sandwiches, cold, Darren had made them. The night was clear and cool. No wind. "Tell me about your mother," he said. Not all of it. Just she was in Cleveland, she was by herself since Dad died. She was the kind of person who would need a lot of convincing, and the convincing might take time we might not have. "Call her," Darren said. "Tonight. Not to convince her. Just to say whatever you'd want to say if you don't get another chance." I looked at him. "I'll call her tomorrow," I said. "I'll go get her tomorrow." He nodded. He didn't push it. I drove back to Columbus that night. The roads were empty, and the corn stubble ran alongside the road for miles, and I thought about my mom in her split level in Cleveland, and about the report sitting on a government server, and about, 4% probability actually feels like when you're living inside it. It feels like driving in at night on a road you've never been on, going fast because you think you know where you're going, and hoping very much that you're right about the road. Day -2. Sunday. I went to work. I know, but here's the thing, I still had work to do. And what I mean by that is not my analytics job. I had access to certain databases and feeds through my work systems that I didn't have at home. And I needed one more day of running verification checks on the peripheral data I'd found. Also, I needed to do one specific thing that I'd been working up to. The office was quiet on Sundays. Maybe 4 or 5 people in. I got in at 8, got coffee, sat at my desk. I spent the first hour accessing every publicly available epidemiological database I could reach and running my own simplified version of the spread model from the report. Not the full thing. I don't have a public health background and I wasn't pretending to. But I could take the transmission rate parameters they'd used, apply them to current census and mobility data, and get a rough picture of what the first 72 hours of an uncontrolled spread event would look like in a Midwestern city. I ran it for Columbus. The results sat in a spreadsheet on my screen for about a minute before I took a screenshot, emailed it to my personal account, and then deleted the file. It was bad. Not in some abstract statistical way. In a very concrete way. The model had roughly 300 people in critical exposure zones within 18 hours of a seeding event. Columbus has just under 900,000 people. I sat with that for a while. Then I did the thing I'd been working up to. There was a name in the document. Not the authors. Those were listed by department and title, not by personal name, which is standard for this kind of federal modeling work. But in the acknowledgments section, there was a person thanked for supplemental pathogen analysis. The name was Dr. Allison Ferber, affiliated with something called the National Institutes of Applied Pathology, which I'd already looked up, and was apparently a small applied research division inside NIH. I found her faculty page. She had a university affiliation, a joint appointment at a research university in Maryland. She had published 22 papers, all publicly accessible, all in the right area of research to have contributed to what I'd read. I emailed her. I know how this sounds, but I thought about it carefully. The email was vague. It referenced anomaly patterns in recent epidemiology data that I'd encountered through consulting work, and asked if she'd be willing to speak with an independent analyst about some modeling questions. I didn't mention the document. I used my personal email, not my work one. I thought there was maybe a 5% chance she'd respond. I kept moving. The rest of Sunday I spent at the farmhouse with Darren, Pete, and Gretchen. Pete had arrived the night before as promised in his ancient Subaru that was now packed with 2 large duffel bags full of medical supplies. I didn't ask too many questions about the sourcing. He'd brought antibiotics, wound care essentials, IV supplies, syringes, painkillers, several courses of antiparasitic medication, and a significant amount of nitrile gloves. He'd also brought, improbably, a portable oxygen concentrator, which he said he'd borrowed from a retiring colleague who was going to throw it out anyway. Gretchen had brought her car packed with her own supplies. She'd spent Saturday doing a very efficient Costco and hardware store run that overlapped with mine. She'd also printed a detailed Ohio County map and had already marked the farmhouse location and several alternate route options. I liked her more in that moment than I ever had before. We sat around the farmhouse kitchen table. Darren had made coffee. Pete ate a granola bar with the efficiency of someone who'd worked a double shift. Gretchen had a notepad. I told them everything. This time the full version, the document, where I found it, the specific projections, the timeline. I laid it out the same way I would a client briefing. Clear, structured, specific. When I finished, nobody said anything for a moment. Then Pete said, 2 weeks, you said, or less. The window in the report is 1 to 3 weeks from last Tuesday, so 9 to 21 days from now. My read on the peripheral data suggests the early end. So maybe 6 to 12 days, Gretchen said. That's my estimate. She wrote something down. What else do we need? She said. We spent 4 hours going through the supply inventory, identifying gaps, making assignments. Pete took responsibility for the medical station. He wanted a specific room, the small study off the kitchen, good light, easy to clean. Gretchen took inventory of the food and water and started calculating daily calorie requirements against stock. Darren and I worked on the vehicle situation. His old pickup truck and my Civic needed full tanks, and we should have additional fuel stored if possible. By the end of the afternoon, we had a fairly detailed picture of where we were and what we still needed. And we had a list of people to add. This was the hard part. Darren had a neighbor named Roy Hester, 55, who owned the property to the west. A farmer, quiet, had been around for decades. Darren trusted him completely. Pete had a girlfriend. Her name was Kelly Dunbar, 29, a teacher. She didn't know yet. Gretchen had a younger brother named Todd, who lived in Columbus. She was on the fence about him, which I found interesting. And I had my mother. I sat at the kitchen table after the others had dispersed to their tasks, and I called her. She answered on the first ring. Owen, I was just thinking about you. Hey, Mom. You sound weird again. Are you sleeping? Yeah. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. That's never a good opener. I know. Listen, I've been doing some analysis work. You know what I do. And I've come across some information that I think is pretty serious. I'm not going to be able to give you all the details because some of it is sourced from things I probably shouldn't have seen. But I want you to come stay with me, not in Columbus, at a friend's property in Granville. Silence. Owen, what is this about? Public health. Something I think is coming, maybe in the next week. Like a virus? Like another COVID situation? Worse than that. Silence. Longer this time. How much worse? She said very quietly. I think you should pack a bag. I think you should take your medications, important documents, anything you can't replace. And I think I should come get you, tomorrow or the day after. Owen. Her voice was careful now, in the way a person gets careful when they're deciding whether to believe something. You're not. You're sure about this. I'm sure that I'm worried enough to ask you, and I'm not a person who worries without reason. You know that. Another pause. Okay, she said. I'll pack a bag. I hadn't been sure she'd say that. I'll call you tomorrow with the plan, I said. Don't tell anyone. I don't mean that in a crazy way. The last thing I want is to start a panic if I'm wrong. What should I tell the Hendersons? The Hendersons were her neighbors. She had dinner with them on Tuesday nights. I thought about that. Tell them you're going to see a friend for a bit. Nothing weird about that. Okay, she said again. She sounded a little shaky, but she was holding it together. My mom was better at holding it together than I gave her credit for. Day -2, evening. I drove back to Columbus that night, and I had a message on my phone when I got home, from Dr. Allison Ferber. It was brief. It said, I don't normally respond to blind inquiries, but your email caught my attention. I'm available for a 20-minute call tomorrow morning. Here's my number. I stared at that message in my parked car for a full minute. Then I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and tried to figure out exactly what I was going to say to her. I spent 2 hours writing questions, not random questions. Structured questions that would let me confirm or disconfirm things without revealing how much I knew. I wanted to see what she'd tell me voluntarily. I wanted to hear her voice and whether it had the quality I associated with someone telling the truth about something they were frightened of. I went to sleep around 1 a.m. and actually slept, which surprised me, maybe because the decision tree was mostly resolved. I'd made the calls, started the preparations, set things in motion. There was a particular exhausted calm that came with that. My last thought before sleeping was, if I'm wrong about this, I've spent $6,000, scared my mother, and wasted a week of my life. I was very okay with that outcome. Day -1, Monday. The call with Dr. Ferber was at 9. I called from my car, parked in a side street near my apartment. I don't know why I didn't just call from inside. Something about the enclosed space felt wrong. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was calm, slightly guarded. Mr. Calloway, you mentioned anomalies in recent epidemiology data. Yes. I've been doing independent analysis, and I've been tracking some patterns in Midwest cluster reports that seem unusual. What kind of patterns? I described what I'd found in the epidemiology blogs and the cluster data, speaking as though I'd found it all through normal public research channels. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Where specifically are you based, she asked. Columbus, Ohio. Another pause. Mr. Calloway. Her voice shifted slightly, something small in the register of it. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I'd like an honest answer. Okay. Have you seen a document that you shouldn't have seen? The question sat in the air of my car. I thought about my options. I could lie. I could dodge. I could hedge. But she'd called me back. Out of all the possible responses to a cold email from an unknown analyst, she'd called me back. And the way she'd asked that question was not the way someone asks it when they're trying to catch you out. It was the way someone asks it when they're hoping the answer is yes. Yes, I said. Silence. Okay. She exhaled. Then you understand why I'm not in a position to confirm or deny anything directly. I understand. What I can tell you is that everything you're concerned about is being taken seriously by people who have the ability to act on it. Are they acting on it? A long pause. Some of them are trying, she said. The challenge is bureaucratic and political rather than scientific. The modeling is not in dispute. The response is complicated. So no public warning, not in the near term. What is the near term, I said. Days? Weeks? Another pause. Longer. I can't give you specific timing, she said. What I can tell you is that your instinct to take this seriously is correct, and that anyone in a position to help themselves or their people do so in the coming days, should. The coming days. Thank you, I said. Mr. Calloway, be careful. The document you found, don't share it. Don't talk about it publicly. Not because of legal exposure. I know that sounds cold, but honestly that's the least of anyone's concerns right now, because I genuinely don't think it would help. The people who need to act at scale are not reading anonymous posts, and the people who would read it mostly can't do anything productive in the time available. I know, I said. I'm not going public with it. I'm just trying to get the people I care about somewhere safe. That's the right call, she said, and she hung up. I sat in the car for a long time. She hadn't confirmed dates, but she'd said coming days in a way that felt like she meant less than a week. Today was Monday. I drove straight to Columbus to pick up my mother. Picking up my mother was not a straightforward operation. She had packed, as I'd asked, one large suitcase and a smaller bag. But she'd also decided that she needed to properly close up her house, which involved her normal level of thoroughness. Checking all the appliances, running all the faucets to make sure none dripped, setting up a plant watering schedule that she'd apparently arranged with the Henderson woman for a 2-week absence she was planning to lie about. I sat in her kitchen and waited. It took an hour and 40 minutes. While I waited, I called Darren and gave him a status update. He told me Roy Hester had agreed to come over. He'd apparently just said, "Yeah, Darren, okay," in the flat way of someone from whom dramatic reactions are not in supply, which Darren said was exactly what he'd expected. Pete was already at the farmhouse with Kelly, he'd told her. He'd had a version of the same conversation I'd had with my mom, except that Kelly, who I didn't know well, had apparently responded by asking where they were going and immediately starting to pack. Pete said she was a lot calmer about it than he'd expected, which he attributed to the fact that she'd been teaching in a school district with inadequate resources for years and had a fairly resigned relationship with the concept of societal failure. I liked Kelly already. Gretchen would be at the farmhouse by evening. My mom came back into the kitchen and said she was ready. She's a small woman, my mom. Not small in a fragile way. She's sharp and practical, and she ran a 2-person accounting firm for 20 years, while raising me mostly by herself after my dad died. But she looked small that morning in her kitchen with her suitcase, and there was something in her face that I recognized as a very controlled and very restrained version of fear. "Is this bad, Owen?" she said. Not a question, really. "I think it might be," I said. "I hope I'm wrong." She looked around her kitchen for a moment. The plants in the window, the coffee maker, the photograph of my dad on the counter, the one she'd had there since he died, that I never moved when I came to visit because she'd put it exactly where she wanted it. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." We drove to Granville. That night, Monday night, day -1, all 7 of us were at the farmhouse. Darren, me, my mom, Pete and Kelly, Gretchen, and Roy Hester, who'd driven over in a beat-up pickup truck at dusk with a box of canned goods and a shotgun he didn't make any fuss about. We ate dinner together. Darren made a big pot of chili on the wood stove, real chili, the kind with dried beans he'd soaked for hours. It was the best meal I'd had in a week. We didn't talk much about what we were there for. We talked about practical things. Roy knew where to get propane on the county road, and there was a small store about 7 miles away that he thought would still be operating. Pete and Kelly had done a thorough inventory of the medical room. Gretchen had updated the food supply calculations and said we were at roughly 65 days for 7 people on a reduced-calorie diet, which we should supplement with fresh supply runs before the window closed. My mom sat next to Roy at the table, and they talked about farming, which she knew nothing about, but asked about with genuine interest. Roy was a man of approximately 200 words per day, but he used them well. After dinner, I went out to the porch by myself. The night was clear, cold enough to need a jacket. The stars were the kind you can only see away from city lights, thick and close, filling the sky in a way that always looks slightly fake, like a stage set. I thought about the document, the 47 pages, and what they contained. I thought about Dr. Ferber and her careful voice and the way she'd said, "coming days." I thought about Dr. Ferber and the people she'd said were trying to act. I thought about whether there was something else I should be doing, some warning I should be sending, some way to help more people. And I came to the same conclusion I'd come to 3 times before. No, not in the time available, not with the information available. I was one person with a data set and a small group of scared, smart people. I had made the best decisions I could with what I had. I had gotten the people I could reach to the safest place I could find. It was going to have to be enough. I went back inside. Tomorrow, I said to the group, when everyone was still gathered at the table, we do 2 things. We finish the supply run. Roy's going with Gretchen to that store, and we're going to clean it out if we can. And we start a watch rotation for tonight. Pete and I take first watch. Everyone nodded. And if nothing happens by next Monday, I said, we evaluate. If I'm wrong, we reevaluate the whole thing. But for now, we stay. Nobody argued. I went to bed. Day 7, Tuesday. I need to tell you about the morning first. It was quiet. The birds were going. The light was that particular autumn quality, low and gold orange, coming sideways through the kitchen windows. I'd slept maybe 4 hours. Not great, but functional. Pete was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a coffee, scrolling through his phone. When I came in, he looked up. "There's something happening in Cincinnati," he said. I sat down. He handed me his phone. It was a Reddit post, nothing official. Someone in the Norwood neighborhood of Cincinnati saying their neighbor had attacked them. That the neighbor wasn't responding to anything. Not pain, not words. That the neighbor had bitten their dog badly enough that they'd had to put the dog down. That the post was from about 2 hours ago, and that in the replies, which had accumulated fast, there were 4 other accounts from the same neighborhood saying similar things. I handed the phone back. "Any news coverage?" I said. "Nothing yet. Fox 19 in Cincinnati has a cryptic tweet about reports of disturbances in the Norwood area. That's it." I looked at the window, the gold light, the empty field. "Wake everyone up," I said. He went. By the time everyone was in the kitchen, bleary, in their clothes from the night before, my mom with her hair still plaited from sleep. I had the laptop out and was pulling everything I could find. The Cincinnati posts had multiplied. 3 news stations had posted brief, confused updates. Cincinnati police had put out a statement asking residents to stay inside, citing isolated violent incidents, which was the kind of language that gets used when you don't want to say what's actually happening. I found a X, thread from someone who identified themselves as a night shift EMT in Cincinnati, who said they'd had 14 separate bite-related calls in the past hour, that in every case the aggressor had continued attacking after sustaining injuries that should have stopped them, and that the aggressor in 2 separate incidents had not been stopped by pepper spray. I showed Pete that one. "That's it," he said. "That's what the report described. Yeah, we have maybe a few hours before this reaches Columbus." I looked at the clock, 7:43 a.m. "Gretchen," I said, "you and Roy need to go to that store now. I mean right now. Leave in 10 minutes. She was already standing up. "Get everything non-perishable. Everything. Don't be polite about it. Just take it. Leave money on the counter if you want, but take it." She nodded. "Owen," my mom said. She was standing by the sink. Her voice was steady, but she was holding the counter. "I know," I said. "We're okay. We're where we need to be. Just everyone do the thing they're assigned to do." The next hour was controlled chaos. Gretchen and Roy left in Roy's truck. Pete and Kelly started on the medical room. Final organization, making sure everything was accessible in the order it might be needed. Darren checked the wood stove and then went to the barn to bring in additional fuel and tools. I stood in the living room with my laptop and tracked what was happening in Cincinnati. It spread very fast, faster than even the early end of the report's projection. By 8:30 a.m., the news coverage was fragmentary and contradictory. Multiple conflicting, accounts, police asking for calm, hospital emergency lines overwhelmed. By 9 a.m., a video appeared on Twitter that I watched once and closed, because it confirmed what I'd been afraid of, and I didn't need to watch it again. It was from a gas station on the I-71 corridor between Cincinnati and Columbus. It was someone filming from inside their car, hands shaking, and it showed about a dozen people on the gas station forecourt in various states of. It doesn't matter. What mattered was that 2 of them were clearly infected, clearly aggressive, clearly not in control of themselves in any recognizable way. They moved with a kind of purposeful blundering. Not fast, not clever, just completely without the self-protective instincts that stop a normal person from walking directly into traffic or a moving vehicle. Pure drive toward whoever was making the most noise, not fast. That was important. I noted that. Not fast. My phone rang. It was a Columbus number I didn't recognize. I answered. There was just sound on the other end. A lot of it, not voices. A scraping, a distant impact sound, something rhythmic and wrong. Then whoever was holding the phone said, very quietly, "Hello? Hello? Is someone there? Please." "Hello," I said. "I'm here. What's happening?" "I don't. Something is wrong. I don't know." "My neighbor." I could hear. "Where are you?" "An apartment complex name. In Columbus, northwest side." "Get inside and lock your door," I said. "Don't go out. If you can get to a top floor, do that." "Do you have food and water?" What? I have. Food and water. In your apartment. Enough for a few days. I think. Some. What is happening?" "I don't have all the answers," I said. "Stay inside. Don't open your door to anyone unless you're sure they're not." I stopped. I didn't know how to say the rest of it to a stranger. "Okay," they said. "Okay, thank you." They hung up. I stared at my phone. More calls came in over the next 2 hours. Not to me specifically. I had given my number to almost nobody. But Pete was getting calls from colleagues at Grant Medical. Gretchen was getting texts from supply chain contacts in the city. Darren got a call from a cousin in Zanesville, asking what was going on because there were reports of something. We didn't answer most of them. I felt terrible about that. I still do. But we couldn't. We were 7 people on a farmhouse property with enough room for maybe 12, and we were 40 miles from the city. And there was no way to help people remotely. The only thing we could do was stay functional. Gretchen and Roy got back at 10:15 a.m. The truck bed was packed. They'd cleaned out the store, pretty much. Roy had left cash on the counter, more than the value of the goods by his estimate, because Roy was that kind of person. The store owner had already been gone when they arrived, which was a bad sign about what was happening at her end, but a practical good sign for us. They'd also seen, on the road back, 3 cars stopped in the ditch. Not crashed badly, just stopped. And a man walking in the middle of the county road who hadn't turned when the truck honked and had kept walking without turning. He'd been about 200 yards back, and they'd driven around him. Roy said this in a flat voice without editorial comment. He was a man who processed things at his own pace. Was he? Kelly started. "Couldn't tell," Roy said. "He was walking. That's all I know." Pete was already going through the new supplies with Kelly, categorizing, logging. I went to the window and looked out at the empty county road. At the end of the gravel driveway, it was quiet. That was the thing that hit me then. The farmhouse was quiet. Outside it was a normal Ohio autumn morning. Corn stubble, crows, a slight wind off the north. The sky was that flat gray it gets in October, right before rain. The driveway was empty. And somewhere northeast, 40 miles away, Columbus was starting to burn. I could see the faint orange tint on the horizon a few hours later. Not fire orange, just color, like a sunset in the wrong direction. I don't know if I was really seeing smoke or if it was my brain projecting. Could have been either. My mom stood next to me at the window. She didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. After a while, she went back to the kitchen and started organizing the canned goods into the shelving system Gretchen had set up. That was the first day. The apocalypse didn't announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It came in pieces, over a morning, in Reddit posts, and shaky phone videos and news tickers, and the distant orange tint of a horizon that shouldn't have been that color. And we stood in a farmhouse and watched and stayed quiet. Day 8, Wednesday. The radio told us things the internet stopped telling us by midday. Pete had an old battery-powered shortwave radio, a Sangean unit he'd had since college, good quality. We got it set up in the living room and kept it running on low volume most of the day. Columbus stations went to emergency broadcast mode around noon. The automated loop that tells you to stay inside, stay calm, follow official guidance. Nothing specific, nothing useful. We got a Cincinnati station for a while that was still running a live broadcast. 2 people talking, voices strained but professional, reporting what was coming in through their lines. Hospital system overloaded. Police requesting assistance from National Guard. Incidents in suburban areas, not just the city core. I-75 backed up for miles in both directions as people tried to evacuate. They didn't say zombies. They said aggressive infected individuals and extreme behavioral symptoms. And other careful phrases that didn't quite hold the actual shape of what was happening. What was happening, based on everything I was tracking, was this. Cincinnati had lost containment by midnight Tuesday. The outbreak had spread into the adjacent suburbs, Blue Ash, Norwood, Kenwood, and was seeding outward along major roads because infected people were walking. And people in cars who encountered infected people were either trying to help and getting bitten or panic swerving and causing accidents that blocked roads and created noise that drew more infected. Columbus had its first confirmed clusters by Tuesday evening. Grant Medical had gone into lockdown. I heard this from Pete, who'd gotten a message from a colleague there. The message said the lobby had to be cleared. It said the colleague was in a supply room on the 3rd floor with 2 other nurses and was not sure about the rest of the building. That message was the last Pete received from her. We talked about it later, in the night. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the lights low, doing something methodical with the medical supply inventory that didn't strictly need doing. At that moment, I sat across from him. "You don't know," I said. "No, she might be okay." "Yeah," he said. He didn't sound like he believed it. I didn't push it. What I want to talk about for a minute is how the group dynamics worked in those first few days. Because it's not what you'd expect from the movies, and it matters. Nobody had a breakdown. Nobody panicked badly. There was one moment on Wednesday afternoon when Kelly, who had been holding things together very well, went to the back porch and cried for about 20 minutes. And Pete went out with her, and they stood there together until she was done. Then she came back in and helped Darren organize the tool storage in the barn. Roy was almost alarmingly normal. He did the things he'd always done on a farm. Checked the fencing, organized the equipment, assessed what needed maintenance. He talked to the chickens, which Darren had gotten from somewhere. No, wait, that was later. I'm getting ahead. In those first days, Roy was just quiet and practical, and seemed to have decided that whatever was happening, there was still work to do, and work got done. My mom took over the kitchen. This sounds small. It wasn't. Having someone who would reliably produce food at regular intervals, who would know when people needed to eat and what they needed, and how to get it done with limited supplies. That person was the organizational backbone of the whole operation. She'd been an accountant. She applied her accounting brain to the kitchen. Inventory, rotation, calorie planning. She and Gretchen worked on it together. Gretchen's contribution in those early days was something I hadn't anticipated. She could read supply chains intuitively, which meant she immediately started thinking about what we were going to run out of first and second and third. What the bottlenecks were, where the vulnerabilities in our setup were. She mapped it on paper and put it on the kitchen wall. I contributed the thing I'd been contributing since day one: information. I tracked what was happening outside. Radio, internet while we had it. Our connection started getting unreliable Wednesday afternoon, I think because infrastructure was failing somewhere upstream, and whatever came in through direct contact. Darren was the house. He knew every system, every quirk, every problem. He kept things running. Pete was the body. If someone got hurt or sick, Pete was the person. He also had the quietest authority of anyone in the group. Not because he said so much, but because when he said something, everyone listened, because he said things that were right. This was the group, not a military unit, not a disaster movie team of conveniently skilled archetypes. Just 7 people who'd had maybe 4 days of planning, sitting in a farmhouse in Ohio, trying to understand what was happening and what to do next. Day 9, Thursday. This is the day I want to talk about for a while. The night before had been clear and cold. I'd done a watch from midnight to 3, sitting on the porch with the 3006 across my knees, watching the driveway and the county road and listening. Nothing came. I went to bed. At 6 a.m. Pete woke me up. He'd gotten a signal on the shortwave, not a broadcast, a transmission. Someone's actual voice, not the automated loop. Male voice, adult, speaking deliberately. He'd given GPS coordinates and said he was at a farmhouse on Route 40 East, about 8 miles from us, with a group of 6, requesting any contact. We talked about it. I was cautious. Gretchen was cautious. Roy said, "I know that property, the Wentz place. Guy's name is Harold. He's been there 20 years, which was about as good a reference as we were going to get. We didn't go that day, but we kept monitoring. What I did instead was take stock. I made a list of what we didn't know. I still do this. Lists of unknowns, because your unknowns are where the real danger lives. We didn't know how far the outbreak had spread beyond the cities, whether there were any government or military response operations in progress, whether the farmhouse's location was visible on any registry that might direct desperate survivors toward it, whether the infection could spread through animals. I'd seen something in the report about vector research, but it was inconclusive. Whether the infected individuals we might encounter were operating on any kind of behavioral pattern we could predict. That last one, because what I'd seen in the footage I'd watched. And I'll be honest, I watched more of it than was good for me in those first days, because I was trying to build a behavioral model, was that the infected moved towards sound. That was the primary observable pattern. Loud sounds drew them. They moved without coordination, without strategy, without any apparent awareness of obstacles or terrain. They didn't avoid things that should hurt them. They didn't seem to register pain in any functional way. They also didn't organize. In everything I watched, they didn't group with purpose. They converge on sound sources because they were all moving toward the same stimulus, not because they were working together. That was a critical distinction. A mass of infected moving toward a gas station that someone had just driven into and honked was not a tactical assault. It was physics, sound, proximity, movement. What that meant practically. Noise discipline was the single most important survival parameter we had. Stay quiet, stay inside, don't attract attention, and the infected would mostly pass you by. I wrote this up and put it on the kitchen wall next to Gretchen's supply map. On Thursday afternoon, we had our first proximity encounter. A single infected individual came up the county road. It was moving slowly. Slow is the wrong word. Actually, it was walking at something close to a normal walking pace, but it was the particular quality of the movement that was wrong. That total absence of anything purposeful or self-aware, like watching a very bad puppet of a person. Roy saw it from the upstairs window. We stayed completely quiet. It moved past the end of the driveway without stopping. The driveway is a 1/4 mile of gravel, set back from the road, and there was nothing drawing it toward us. It just walked past. We watched it go. Nobody said anything. When it had been out of sight for about 5 minutes, my mom came into the living room where we'd all gathered around the front windows and said, in a very controlled voice, "I'm going to make tea." She went to the kitchen. That moment, the tea moment, is one of the clearest things I remember. The absolute necessary normalcy of it. Something to do with your hands. Something hot. Something familiar. We all had tea. The discussion that followed was important. Roy said that if more came through on the county road, the long gravel driveway was good cover, but we shouldn't assume it was invisible. Any infected that came down the driveway itself would hear us if we were talking normally, and they'd move toward us. Gretchen said we needed to think about what we'd do if a group of survivors showed up asking for help. How many could we handle? What the decision process looked like. Pete said we needed to decide whether we were going to respond to Harold Wentz on Route 40. I said all of these things were connected and we should talk through all of them. We spent the next 3 hours doing exactly that. On Harold Wentz, we would respond. Roy would drive to make initial contact and assess the situation. 6 survivors at a known farm 8 miles away was an asset, not just a moral obligation. If they had supplies, skills, or resources we lacked, and if they seemed stable, we could establish a communication link and potentially a mutual support arrangement. On additional survivors arriving unannounced, we needed a clear protocol. Someone on watch at all times. Anyone approaching on foot would be assessed from a distance before any contact. Anyone requesting shelter would be assessed for injury and behavior before being allowed close to the house. This was hard and I hated putting it into words, but Pete backed it up immediately with a nurse's clarity about why it was necessary. Bite wounds, he said. Anyone who arrives needs to be checked for bite wounds. That's not negotiable. On noise discipline, I drafted a set of rules that we posted in every room. No shouting, no running, no unnecessary engine noise. The generator only in emergencies. Music on speaker only with all windows closed. Conversations in normal speaking voice inside, whisper or hand signals on the porch. It felt extreme. It would feel much less extreme in about 2 weeks. Days 10 through 14. I'm going to move faster through this stretch. Because the days had a sameness that I don't want to make you sit through in real time. A routine built itself out of necessity, and routines are important. They keep people sane. They create a scaffold for behavior when your brain is running too hot to think clearly. We had one. Morning watch handoff. Breakfast. Supply inventory check. Radio monitoring. Pete doing rounds on medical status. Gretchen updating food and supply tracking. Midday. Maintenance and improvement work. Darren ran this. Fence repair, firewood, weatherproofing, barn organization. Roy and Gretchen usually joined him. My mom handled kitchen. Pete handled medical room. I sat with the radio and whatever internet I could get, which was increasingly limited and increasingly inaccurate. Afternoon. Usually the most active time for proximity events on the county road. 2 to 3 infected per day in those first 2 weeks, sometimes more, usually just passing. One afternoon there were 11 in a loose cluster over about 2 hours. We stayed quiet. Evening, communal meal, the best part of the day. My mom had become extraordinary at making good food out of limited ingredients. I don't know where she learned that. Maybe she'd always known. Evening was also the time we talked. Not about logistics, but actually talked. About people we were worried about things we missed, about the world as it had been. Kelly told us about her students. Elementary school, 3rd grade. 8-year-olds. She talked about specific kids by name. What they were good at, what they struggled with, what made them laugh. She did it without crying, mostly in the deliberate way of someone who needed to say the names out loud to keep those people real. Roy talked about his wife, who had passed 4 years ago. Not sadly, just matter-of-factly the way farmers talk about weather patterns. They'd had 30 good years, he said. He reckoned that was more than most. Darren told stories about my dad from their college years that I'd never heard. Small stories, specific. The time my dad drove Darren's car into a drainage ditch and they spent 4 hours getting it out. The particular awful soup my dad used to make in their dorm room that everyone pretended to like. I sat there and listened and felt something open up in my chest that had been closed for a long time. That was night 14. I remember it clearly. The fire on the horizon had been visible 3 nights running. Not the orange tint I'd thought I'd imagined on the first day, but actual fire, real fire, enough to see the glow. Columbus was burning in patches. We didn't know what specifically. The radio gave us fragments. Day 15. Harold Wentz was a 58-year-old former electrical contractor, and his group of 6 included his wife, Nancy, their adult son, Derek, a young woman named Priya, who had been driving from Columbus to Cincinnati when she'd pulled off at their farm at the start of everything, an older man named Kenneth, who was a retired school teacher, and a teenage girl named Bridget, who was Kenneth's granddaughter. Roy had made contact on day 11. He'd driven out and back in 2 hours, reported that the Wentz farm was in good shape, that Harold was organized and serious, that they had food and tools and more space than they had people, and that Harold wanted to know if we'd be interested in a supply run toward Columbus together. I'd wanted to say no to that immediately, but I also knew we had a problem that was going to become critical around day 30. Our medical supplies. Pete had taken me through it methodically. We were fine on over-the-counter essentials and bandaging and wound care. We were limited on antibiotics, enough for maybe 2 serious infection courses. We had almost no painkillers with any real strength, and there were specific prescription medications on the list that my mom needed. She had a thyroid condition, managed easily in normal life, potentially serious without medication. We'd brought 2 months of supply. After that, without a refill, her situation would get difficult. Pharmacies. We needed to get to pharmacies. I thought about this for 3 days before I brought it to the group. I'd been watching the county road for patterns. The infected moved mostly during daylight, which I thought was because they moved toward visual stimulus as much as sound in bright conditions. At night, the county road was quieter. Not empty, but quieter. The small town of Granville itself, 7 miles from the farmhouse, had a pharmacy and a small medical supply company and a farm co-op. The co-op was the biggest pull: fuels, tools, seeds, supplement stores for livestock, veterinary medications that overlapped significantly with human ones. Getting into Granville and back would be genuinely useful. It was also genuinely dangerous. I laid out the plan at dinner on day 15. 3 people in 2 vehicles, Roy's truck and my Civic. Pre-dawn departure, no headlights until we're on the main road. The pharmacy first, then the co-op, then out. Maximum 3 hours total. I'll go, Pete said immediately. You're medical, I said. I need you here, which is exactly why I should go. I know what to get. He had a point. Gretchen, I said. She nodded. And Roy said, which was his way of volunteering. I looked at Roy. He was built like someone who'd been doing physical work for 40 years, which he had. He was also calm under pressure in a way that had become apparent over 15 days of living close together. He'd grown up hunting, knew firearms, knew this county. And me, I said. No, Pete said. What? You're the person who knows the most about all of this. The data, the patterns, the supply logistics. If we lose you, we lose the person who knows how to keep this place functioning strategically. You stay. I wanted to argue, but Pete wasn't wrong. I stayed. They left at 4 a.m. in complete silence. I watched from the porch as the 2 vehicles rolled slowly down the gravel. Driveway, the crunch of the gravel, very loud in the pre-dawn quiet, and turned onto the county road without lights. I went inside and sat at the radio. The 2 hours they were gone were the most tense I'd experienced up to that point. Worse than the first day, weirdly. On the first day, there was so much to do that the tension had somewhere to go. This was just waiting. My mom sat with me. She brought coffee. We didn't talk much. At 6:23 a.m., the crunch of gravel in the driveway. They came back with 2 full truckloads. The pharmacy had been unlocked. The door had been broken, not by us, and largely undisturbed, which was one of those small pieces of luck that I'll never stop being grateful for. Most people grabbing things in a panic go for food and water. They don't think about the pharmacy. Pete had worked through it systematically, prioritizing prescriptions, antibiotics, anything with a long shelf life. The co-op had been trickier, locked, intact. Nobody had been there. Roy had a bolt cutter in the truck. They'd been in and out in under 20 minutes with seed stock, propane, fuel stabilizer, veterinary antibiotics, and a remarkable amount of canned dog food that Gretchen had grabbed on the theory that the protein content was decent, and we might eventually have a dog. Roy had also grabbed veterinary surgical supplies, which Pete confirmed later were largely compatible with human use in field conditions. Gretchen had also grabbed something I hadn't asked for. A box of about 40 small notebooks and pens from the shuttered pharmacy counter display. I'd asked her why. People are going to need to write things down, she said. Information, logistics, contacts. Paper doesn't need power. I gave her one of those looks. She gave me a flat look back. She was right. Days 16 through 23. The Harold Wentz connection became formal. Roy had established a radio check-in schedule, twice daily, 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., on a channel we'd agreed on. It was mostly information exchange. What they'd seen on their roads, how supplies were holding, anything unusual. On day 18, Harold reported something unusual. He said Priya, the young woman who'd stopped at his farm, had found something in her car that she'd forgotten about. A laptop. And on that laptop, she'd had a partially downloaded government emergency brief that she'd accidentally picked up through a work VPN connection. She was a software engineer who'd been doing remote work, and apparently her company's VPN had granted inadvertent access to a federal data clearinghouse during a network transition. The document she'd captured was different from mine, shorter, less detailed, but it covered some of the same ground. He wanted to know if we'd seen anything similar. I thought about this for a while. Then I called him back and said yes. We talked for 40 minutes. Harold was a careful man, methodical, the kind of person who'd spent decades doing electrical contracting, which requires you to trace invisible systems and understand how things connect. He'd had the same instinct I had about the document. Not panic, just preparation. He'd started slower than me. He'd first seen Priya's document on day 3 of the outbreak, but he'd been moving fast since. But what he told me next changed my trajectory entirely. Priya had been running metadata analysis on her document. She was a software engineer. This was her version of what I'd done, and she'd found something in the document's revision history. A comment thread, partially redacted, that referenced something called Facility Bravo 7. The comment said, in context that she'd partially reconstructed, something about Bravo 7 sample integrity and the facility protocol in the event of public spread. Facility. Protocol. Sample integrity. Harold said Priya believed, based on the terminology and context, that Bravo 7 was a research facility. A specific one that had been involved in the original pathogen work. I sat with that. Does she have a location? I said. Not confirmed, Harold said, but there's a partial. She found a reference in a footnote to Site B7, Morrow County. Morrow County is 40 miles north of you. I looked at the county map on the kitchen wall. Morrow County was right there. A rural county, not much in it. I'd driven through it twice on the way to Cleveland. I didn't say anything for a moment. I'm not saying it's a cure, Harold said carefully. I'm just telling you what she found. I know, I said. I know. I thought about Dr. Ferber. What she'd said. The modeling is not in dispute. The response is complicated. I need to think about this, I said. Take your time, Harold said. We signed off. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with the county map in front of me. 40 miles north. In a county that had maybe 40,000 people before all of this, which now had God knows how many infected, and how many survivors, and how many empty roads and one possible, unverified, partially redacted reference to a research facility that might know something about what had started this. I should have let it go. I know how that sounds now, like the reasonable, sensible call. Stay at the farmhouse, keep the group safe. Don't go chasing a partial footnote. I've never been good at letting data anomalies go. That conversation with Darren happened on day 23. We were in the barn. He was doing something with the generator. Maintenance. The eternal maintenance of things that can't be allowed to fail. I was helping him by handing tools and staying out of the way. I told him what Harold and Priya had found, what I was thinking about doing. He kept working while I talked. Long after I finished, he was still working. How many people would go with you, he said. Pete. Maybe Roy, maybe not. I don't want to strip the house. It's 40 miles. Yeah. Through whatever's on the roads between here and there. Yeah. He tightened something, put the wrench down, looked at me. Your father was like this, he said. Not reckless, but he couldn't not know things. Something was unclear and he'd worry at it until he understood it. Is that a no? I said. It's an observation. He picked the wrench up again. If you're going, take the truck, not the Civic. Better visibility. Take plenty of fuel and come back. I plan to. I mean it. Whatever you find, if you find anything, come back. I will. He didn't say anything else. We finished with the generator. So this is the turn in the story. The part where I stop just surviving and start looking for something bigger. I want to be honest about my motivations. Some of it was the analytical brain, the thing I can't turn off, the need to understand the system fully. Some of it was genuine hope that if there was a facility, there might be information, and if there was information, there might be something actionable. Some of it was, and this is the part I'm least proud of, some of it was that sitting in a farmhouse tracking, supply inventories, even when that work was critically important, felt like being a passive observer to something I had more knowledge about than almost anyone alive. I found the document. I verified the document. I prepared because the document was right. And now there was another data trail and I couldn't look away from it. Pete, when I told him, said, Obviously I'm going." Kelly said, "You both come back. That's the rule." My mom, in the kitchen, stopped what she was doing when I told her. She looked at me for a moment. "Be careful," she said. 3 words, my mom, day 24, the departure. We left at 5 a.m., me, Pete, and Roy. Roy had decided that morning, no announcement. He'd just been standing at the truck with his coffee when Pete and I came out. Nobody argued. We took Darren's truck. It had a full tank and we had 3 5-gallon jerry cans in the bed, capped tight. Firearms in the cab, the 9mm for me. Pete's had a short-barreled shotgun that had been Harold's spare, gifted to him at the supply exchange we'd done on day 20. Roy drove. He was the best driver of the 3 of us by a significant margin, in the specific sense of knowing how to navigate county roads without panicking and how to read a rural landscape for problems before you got to them. The first 15 miles were manageable. The county roads had the same pattern I'd gotten used to from watching the driveway road. Infected moving singly or in loose groups of 2 to 4, distributed along roads, moving toward whatever noise had last attracted them. Roy drove slowly and quietly, no sudden moves, and we passed several infected for stretch without incident. They didn't turn toward us unless we made noise. Roy cut the engine twice, and we coasted past clusters, which I wouldn't have thought to do. It worked. I was taking notes the whole time. Behavioral observations, geography. Which roads looked passable, which were blocked by abandoned vehicles. The first bad stretch was outside a town called Mount Gilead. The road going through town was absolutely gridlocked. 30 vehicles stopped at various angles, some with doors open, most clearly abandoned in a hurry. At least a dozen infected visible, moving through the car maze in a desultory way, bumping off things, changing direction randomly. We stopped at the town's edge. "We go around?" Roy said. He was already turning around. The detour added about 40 minutes, but we stayed quiet and we went around and we didn't have to deal with the town. 30 miles in, Pete said. There. A county road sign. And next to it, on a wire fence, a small laminated sign. Facility access road. No trespassing. The signage was the kind of ultra-generic government-issued visual language that could mean anything. A water treatment facility, a storage depot, an agricultural testing site. But it was the only fenced facility road we'd seen in Morrow County. Roy turned down it. The access road went about 2 miles through a woodlot. It was a gravel road, slightly better maintained than the surrounding county roads, which told you something. At the end of it, in a clearing, was a complex of 3 low buildings. Concrete block construction, flat roofs, the kind of purposefully forgettable architecture that means something is trying not to be noticed. A high chain-link fence with barbed wire. A vehicle gate that was standing open. I checked my handwritten notes from Priya's transmission. "Bravo 7, I said quietly. We sat at the edge of the road for about 5 minutes and watched. No infected visible. The complex was quiet. The vehicle gate being open was the first warning sign. Either someone had left in a hurry, or someone had come in and not secured it behind them. "We go slow," said. "We stay quiet. Pete, you watch the buildings." "Roy." "I know," Roy said. We drove in. The main building's front door was unlocked. Not broken, unlocked, handle turned, just not quite closed. It swung open when I pushed. The lobby was empty. A reception desk, standard institutional furniture, a logo on the wall that said National Integrated Pathogen Research Consortium. Midwest Division, which told me nothing specific but confirmed this was the right kind of place. Hallways, labs, all quiet. In the second lab, we found the first signs of what had happened here. Overturned furniture, broken glass. Not the marks of violence exactly, more like someone had left in extreme haste, knocking things over. A laptop was still open on a workbench. Battery dead. Filed papers were scattered. 3 of the 6 specimen freezers had been manually unlocked and opened from the outside. Pete was looking at the lab equipment with wide eyes. "This is serious research infrastructure," he said quietly. "This isn't a field office." "No," I agreed. We found the server room on the 3rd corridor. And here's where things got strange. The server room was not abandoned. Someone had been in it recently. Recently meaning within the last week, based on the empty food containers I found in the corner, and the recently used chemical toilet setup behind a partition screen that I won't describe in detail, but that definitely had been used within days. Someone had been living in the server room, and on the whiteboard mounted on the wall of the server room, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a message. It was written in 3 sections. The first section was a name and a contact protocol, a radio frequency, and a call sign. The second section said, pathogen designation, PHV7, transmission confirmed, fluid contact, aerosol proximity under 6 feet. Antiviral compound designated AVX9 shows 87% efficacy in pre-outbreak trials. Sample batch stored in cold unit B3. Key in specimen drawer 4. If you're reading this and we're not here, take the samples. Keep them cold. Don't let them sit above 38 Fahrenheit for more than 6 hours. Find Dr. A. Ferber. I stared at that name. Dr. A. Ferber. The third section was a set of GPS coordinates and what appeared to be a partial travel route with a note. She moved the operation. If she's still running, this is where. I stood in that room for a long time. Pete came in. He read the board. He read it again. Owen, he said. I know. Dr. A. Ferber. I know. I took out one of Gretchen's notebooks and I copied everything on the whiteboard. Every word. The exact spelling of AVX9 and PHV7. The GPS coordinates, the frequency and call sign. Then I photographed the whiteboard on my phone, which still had battery. Pete found specimen drawer 4. The key was there. The cold unit B3 was a portable laboratory refrigeration unit, about the size of a large cooler, powered by a heavy-duty battery pack that was still running. Inside were 12 sealed sample vials, labeled systematically, ice-packed, at exactly the right temperature. Can we transport this? I said. Pete was already thinking. The battery pack, how long does it last? He checked it. The indicator showed about 14 hours remaining. We take it, I said. We took it. We also spent another 20 minutes going through the labs, collecting anything that seemed useful. Lab notebooks, printed research protocols, 3 more sealed sample sets from different freezers, a portable analysis kit that Pete said he could partially read. We loaded everything into the truck bed, packed the cold unit carefully. And then we heard something from outside that made us freeze. Not infected, something else. An engine, a vehicle approaching on the access road. Roy was already at the front of the building when we came out, watching the access road. The vehicle was a dark green pickup truck, newer than Roy's, government plates. It stopped at the edge of the parking area. One person got out. She was maybe 50, slight, dark hair going gray. She had a rifle on her shoulder and she was looking at our truck and at us with the expression of someone doing a rapid threat assessment. I knew. Before she said anything, I knew from the picture on the faculty page I'd looked at 3 weeks ago. Dr. Ferber, I said. She stopped moving. Who are you? She said. Her voice was exactly the same as on the phone. Controlled, slightly guarded. My name is Owen Calloway. We spoke on the phone, before the outbreak. A pause. A very long one. You were the analyst, she said. Yes. She looked at the cold unit visible in the truck bed. Then she looked back at me. Did you take the AVX9, she said. Yes. Good, she said. That's exactly what you should have done. She put her rifle over her shoulder. She walked toward us. Dr. Allison Ferber had been at the facility until day 3 of the outbreak, when the access road had become compromised and she'd had to leave. She'd been at the GPS coordinates on the whiteboard since then. A second site, smaller, that had been set up as a fallback. She'd left the whiteboard message 3 days ago, on a supply, run back to the facility to recover additional research materials, when she'd found signs that someone had been there and might return. She had not expected it to be someone who already knew her name. We drove in convoy to the second site. A farmhouse, actually, not unlike our own, about 30 miles northeast. She'd been there alone since day 3. 12 days alone. We talked in the farmhouse kitchen. Her, me, Pete. Roy was outside watching the road. She told me things that I'm going to try to convey accurately. The document I'd found was accurate. The pathogen, PHV7, was real, was engineered, or at minimum modified, which she said carefully, and I noted the caution, because engineered has implications that modified softens. The Bravo 7 facility had been one of 3 sites conducting research on it, not creating the pathogen, she said, but studying a sample that had been acquired through channels she was still trying to reconstruct. The antiviral compound AVX9 had been developed at the facility. It had been in trials. It was not a cure. She was precise about this. It was a treatment that, administered in the early stages of infection, had shown 87% efficacy in preventing the neurological cascade. The full cascade, the aggression, the loss of inhibitory function. It required a specific progression through the neurological system, over 12 to 72 hours. If AVX9 was administered before the neurological phase, it interrupted the process. So someone who's been bitten, Pete started. Within the early window, yes. 6 to 12 hours from initial infection depending on host factors. After that, she shook her head. After the neurological onset, AVX9 has no demonstrated effect. How many doses do we have? I said. She looked at the cold unit. With what you brought, between 60 and 80 doses depending on body weight dosing. I thought about what that meant. 60 to 80 people, out of however many were infected or would become infected. Can you make more? I said. The synthesis process requires equipment and precursor materials. Some of what I need is at Bravo 7. Some of it I've been trying to locate. The short answer is yes, I can make more. The longer answer is that I need a stable facility, supplies, and time, none of which I have been able to secure alone. She looked at me steadily. What exactly have you built? She said. In your farmhouse, I told her. People, skills, supplies, location, the Wentz connection. She listened carefully, the same way she'd listened on the phone, fully, without interruption. The precursor chemicals, she said when I finished. I have a list. Some of them I think I know where to source. A pharmaceutical supplier outside Columbus, one in Zanesville. If those facilities are intact, they might be, I said. Pharmaceutical warehouses are not high-traffic targets in a collapse scenario. People don't think of them. She nodded. You've been thinking about supply chains. I've been thinking about supply chains for 3 weeks. For the first time, something crossed her face that might have been close to a smile. Your people, she said. Can they handle more people at the farmhouse? For how long? Long enough to set up a synthesis operation. 2-3 weeks minimum. I thought about Darren's table, about my mom's kitchen, about 8 people who had been, slowly and imperfectly, becoming something functional. Yes, I said, they can. I'm going to skip the drive back a little. Not because nothing happened, but because the specific incidents, 2 road detours, one very tense encounter, with a group of survivors in a stopped vehicle that resolved peacefully after about 5 minutes of very careful communication, a tire pressure issue on the Ferber truck that Roy handled. Don't advance the core story. We got back. We got back on day 25 at about 3 in the afternoon. The farmhouse looked the same as when we'd left. The autumn light on the white siding, the barn behind, the chickens that Darren had actually acquired from somewhere by that point, pecking around the yard. Normal. Impossible. Normal. My mom was on the porch when we pulled in. She watched the 3 of us get out, and she watched the woman who got out of the second truck, and she looked at me with a question. This is Dr. Ferber, I said. She's going to need a room. My mom looked at her for a moment. I'll get the sheets, she said. Days 25 through 38, the farmhouse grew. By the end of week 5, we were 15 people. Harold Wentz and his group came over on day 28. When it became clear that combining resources made more sense than maintaining 2 separate operations 8 miles apart. Darren and Harold turned out to be compatible in the way of men who are both practical and stubborn, and who have enough respect for each other's competence that they don't waste time on ego. The Wentz property became a secondary fallback. Someone went out there weekly to check it. Dr. Ferber set up her synthesis operation in the study, which we'd expanded into the larger back bedroom as well. Pete became her de facto lab assistant. His medical background wasn't identical to her chemistry background, but it was enough for the tasks involved, and he was meticulous. Within a week, they had a partial synthesis running, slow but functional. Gretchen organized the 2 supply runs for the pharmaceutical precursors. I planned the routes. Roy drove both runs, with Harold's son Derek as a second. Both came back. Both brought materials. I want to tell you about something that happened on day 31 that I've been sitting with since. I was doing a radio monitoring session in the kitchen, mid-afternoon, when I picked up a broadcast on a military frequency we'd been checking. Not the automated emergency broadcast, an actual person, male voice, disciplined, clear. Said there was a National Guard mobilization point established at a high school in Westerville, north of Columbus, and that anyone able to reach it should do so. Said they had medical personnel on site. Said they were coordinating survivor extraction operations. I wrote down everything. Then I sat there and thought about what it meant. There was organized government response still operating. Somewhere, not the collapse of everything. A specific team, a specific location, holding something together. I brought it to the group at dinner. The question on the table was, do we go, or do we stay with what we have? Harold said, what do we have here that we'd lose if we left? We listed it. The AVX9 synthesis, the supply network, the properties, the knowledge base we'd built. What do they have there that we don't? Gretchen asked. Scale, military protection, communication networks, possibly the ability to push the AVX9 out at a scale we couldn't. We talked for 2 hours. Dr. Ferber, who had been quiet most of the dinner, said, I need to contact them. Not to go there necessarily. But they need to know about AVX9. They need the synthesis documentation. If there are medical personnel at that location, I can potentially transmit what I know, and they can scale it. How do you transmit it safely? I said. Radio, initially. I'll give them the compound designation and efficacy data. If they have any scientific personnel, they'll understand what they're hearing. Then we see what they say. I thought about Dr. Ferber on the phone with me 3 weeks before the world ended, saying, be careful, and meaning it. Okay, I said. We reach out. Day 32. Dr. Ferber sat at the shortwave radio in the kitchen with Pete beside her and me at the door, and she transmitted on the military frequency. She gave her name, her credentials, the facility designation. She gave the compound designation AVX9 and the efficacy figure of 87%. She gave a brief description of the synthesis process. Then she waited. The response came 11 minutes later. A different voice than before, a woman's voice, sharp and quick. Dr. Ferber, this is Major Hendricks, Ohio National Guard Medical Corps. We are aware of the AVX9 work. We have been trying to locate you for 12 days. Please confirm your location. Dr. Ferber looked at me. I nodded. She gave the farmhouse coordinates. That conversation, and the ones that followed over the next 3 days, changed everything again. Major Hendricks was at the Westerville site with 340 survivors, 12 guard personnel, and 3 medical staff, an ER doctor, a pharmacist, and a lab technician. They had communications with 2 other guard positions, one in Akron, one in Dayton. The national picture, as she gave it, was patchy and grim. But the AVX9 information was something they hadn't had. And the synthesis documentation that Dr. Ferber transmitted, over 4 hours of radio, painstakingly, gave them a path forward that changed their medical response calculus entirely. Major Hendricks said, we need the doctor at this location. The full synthesis needs to be operational here, at scale. I understood that. I also knew that meant Dr. Ferber leaving our farmhouse, and everything that came with her. She told me this directly, the night before she left. I have to go, she said. You know that. I know. What I need you to do, what would actually help, is keep the farmhouse as a forward relay. You have the supply networks. You have people who know this county. You've been building something here that's harder to replicate than it looks. I know that too. She handed me a folded set of papers. The synthesis documentation in simplified form, she said. Pete can follow it maybe, enough to produce emergency doses. Not at scale, but enough for your people. I took it. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. The document I found. The original one. Did you write it? She was quiet for a moment. I contributed to sections of it, she said. Did you think it would be acted on? I thought it should be. I thought the data was clear enough that people would act. She paused. I was wrong about that. You left the whiteboard message. Yes, that was acting on it, I said. She looked at me in a way that I didn't have a word for exactly. So was the cold email, she said. She left the next morning. Pete drove her to the edge of the county in Roy's truck, then came back. She was supposed to reach the Westerville site by afternoon. Hendricks sent a guard vehicle partway to meet her. We heard from her on the radio 12 days later. She'd made it. The synthesis was running. They'd already administered AVX9 to 23 people, all within the early window. All 21 of them had shown no neurological progression. 21 out of 23. I sat at the kitchen table when Pete read me that number. And for the first time since I'd found that document in a misrouted folder on a corporate server 6 weeks ago, I cried. Not for long, maybe 5 minutes. My mom came in and put a hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, just stood there, and I sat there and let it happen. Then I stopped, wiped my face, got up. There was still a supply inventory that needed updating. Day 40. I've been writing this for 3 days now, on and off, in the evenings after watch. Gretchen's notebooks are exactly the right size for the task. I want to tell you a few things about the current state of things, which is day 40 of the outbreak and the 33rd day of life at the farmhouse. We are 15 people. Darren, my mom, Pete, Kelly, Gretchen, Roy, Harold Wentz, his wife Nancy, Derek, Priya, Kenneth, and Bridget. And 3 people who arrived on day 36, a couple named Sam and Donna, Whitfield, who'd been living in a barn on a property east of us, and a man named Fletcher, who'd walked in off the county road, alone, badly dehydrated, a bitten forearm that had been cleaned and dressed, but which Pete examined carefully for the neurological markers for 3 days straight, before he declared Fletcher clean. He'd been bitten on day 3. He'd somehow cleared it naturally, which Dr. Ferber, when I told her over radio, said was consistent with about 13% of exposure cases. He was one of the lucky ones. Fletcher, once he was hydrated and had slept for about 18 hours, turned out to be a high school shop teacher from Mount Vernon. He could fix almost anything with what was in the barn. He and Darren became fast friends. The county road sees maybe 4 or 5 infected per day now, down from the peak in the second week, which had been as high as 20 or 25. I don't know what that means at a macro level, whether it's depletion in the surrounding area, whether the infected are migrating somewhere, whether the overall numbers are thinning. I can theorize. What I know from observable data is that it's getting quieter. That might be good. It might just mean whatever drew them elsewhere. Something happened on day 38 that I haven't fully processed yet. Pete was doing his routine morning rounds, checking everyone's health status, changing a bandage on Bridget's hand from where she'd cut herself doing kitchen prep. He came and found me on the porch. I need to show you something, he said. We went to the barn. Darren was there, but Pete waited until Darren stepped out to check something. Then he showed me his phone, a video he'd taken it the night before on watch. 3 of them, he said, on the county road. Around 2 a.m. I was watching from the upstairs window. I watched the video. It was dark and grainy, and the camera on his phone wasn't great in low light. 3 infected on the county road. Normal enough. Except for about 20 seconds of the video, they'd stopped. Not moving at all. Just standing there. Then one of them, and this is the part that sat wrong in my gut, had turned its head. Not toward a sound. There was no sound. It had just turned its head, slowly, in the direction of the farmhouse, and held that position for about 10 seconds. Then it had continued walking. I watched the video twice. It's probably just random movement, I said. Probably, Pete said. We both knew we were saying probably to make ourselves feel better. The behavioral model I'd built in my head over 40 days was based on a simple, Axiom. They move towards stimulus, no directed movement. They don't stop and look at things. They don't orient on anything without a trigger. That one had oriented. I filed it, flagged it as an anomaly, started watching for it again. I saw it twice more in the next week. Different infected, same behavior, a pause, a turning, a stillness that didn't fit the pattern. Not toward us, not quite, or at least not causing any approach. But wrong. I don't know what it means. I've been running it through my head for days and I can't settle on an explanation that fits the data I have. Dr. Ferber, when I described it over radio, was quiet for a moment and then said, "Keep documenting. Note time, number, duration of pause, direction of orientation." Which is the scientist's version of, "I don't know what that is either." Day 42. Priya and I have been comparing document analyses. She's better at the technical code architecture than I am, which is useful, because the partial document she has some metadata structures I hadn't seen in mine. We've been working in the evenings at the kitchen table, her laptop and my notes. We found something I didn't expect. In the revision history of her document, there are deletion marks, sections that were in an earlier draft and then removed before the version I found. The removals are tracked in the metadata with a timestamp and a user ID. The user ID is a code string, not a name, but the timestamp is specific. The deletions happened 36 days before the outbreak began. And what was deleted, we can't see the content, only the structural outline, the heading levels and word counts. Appears to have been a section titled, in the heading metadata, Mitigation Protocols for Contained Scenarios. Mitigation Protocols for Contained Scenarios. Which means at some point in the drafting process, somebody in that office had written a section about how to stop this before it became what it became. And then that section had been removed. I've been sitting with that for 2 days. I don't have a full answer for why. Political is the obvious one. The kind of calculation where you decide that putting containment protocols in a report is more frightening to the people you're briefing than useful to them, so you trim it. Or the calculation where someone decides the containment window has already passed by the time the report is finished, so the protocols are academic. Or something darker. I don't know. What I know is that it was in there and then it wasn't. I put it in this account because it's data. Because the thing about data is that it doesn't resolve itself just because you want it to. An anomaly is an anomaly. You note it, you track it, you don't throw it out because it's inconvenient. Day 44. Today. The morning was good. My mom made oatmeal with some of the dried fruit from the co-op run. Fletcher and Roy are in the barn working on the old tractor, which Fletcher thinks he can get running, which would expand our operational range significantly. Gretchen is updating the supply calculations. Bridget, Kenneth's granddaughter, who is 15 sharper than any 15-year-old I've ever met, has been helping me with the radio monitoring, and she's getting good at reading the patterns in the transmissions. Nancy Wentz, Harold's wife, has turned out to have a practical knowledge of animal husbandry that none of us had, and between her and Darren, they've gotten the chicken coop fully operational. We had eggs this morning, real eggs, for the first time in 6 weeks. People were unreasonably happy about the eggs. I'm not being dismissive when I say unreasonably. I mean it fully earnestly. The eggs mattered. Small things matter in a way they don't when you're not living at the edge of what you have. A good cup of coffee matters. A clear night sky matters. Waking up and finding the driveway empty matters. We are alive. 15 of us in a white farmhouse in Ohio on a clear November morning with eggs. That is not nothing. That's something significant. I found a document on a Tuesday. I ran the math. I made the calls. I got the people I could reach to the safest place I could find. I was right about the document. I wish I hadn't been. I wish that every day. But I was, and we prepared, and we survived the first wave. and we found the AVX-9, and Dr. Ferber is somewhere making more of it, and apparently it works on most of the people who get it in time, and that means the door is still open, not to what the world was. That door is closed, but to something, to some version of continuing, of building, of people being alive and making eggs and fixing tractors and writing in notebooks. That door is still open. I want to end with two things. The first is the anomaly, the behavioral anomaly, the infected who stops and turns and holds still. I've documented 11 separate observations now. I haven't found a pattern in the timing or the specific individuals or the direction of orientation, except for one thing. In 9 of the 11 cases, the orientation was roughly northeast, roughly in the direction of the coordinates on that whiteboard, roughly in the direction of Bravo 7. I've told Dr. Ferber. She's been quiet about it on the radio, which means she's thinking about it, which means she's worried about it too. There may be something up there. At Bravo 7, something's still operating. I don't know what. I'm keeping notes. The second thing, I mentioned Todd, Gretchen's younger brother, the one she was on the fence about telling. She didn't tell him before the outbreak. She's talked about it once, to Pete, that I know of, and he told me. She'd decided he was the kind of person who would tell too many people, and she couldn't manage the fallout. It might have been the right call. She still doesn't know where he is. I didn't call most of my coworkers. I didn't post anything online. I didn't go to the news. I got the people I could reach. 7 people. If the document hadn't been misrouted, if I hadn't opened it, if I'd been the kind of person who saw "do not distribute" and felt that instruction was sufficient. 7 people who would have spent day 7 in apartments and offices and nowhere close to a plan. I don't know how to feel about being the person who found it. I go back and forth. Some nights it feels like, I don't know, like the analyst training paid off in a way you never expect the training to pay off. Some nights I sit with the people I didn't reach and the thing I didn't do with that document, and it feels like a different accounting entirely. 60 people administered AVX-9 at Westerville as of the last count. 23 of them, statistically, would have gone fully neurological without it. They didn't. They're alive. Do those 23 balance against Todd, wherever he is? Against the colleagues I didn't tell? Against every person in Columbus who didn't have the luck of someone finding the right misrouted file on the right Tuesday? I don't know. I don't think that math works. I don't think it's supposed to. The document said 73.4% probability. It said 60 to 80% mortality in an uncontrolled scenario. The actual numbers are still coming in, still incomplete, still being assembled in pieces across fractured radio communications and personal accounts, and whatever records survive. What I know for certain is a smaller number. 15 people alive in a farmhouse in Ohio. Eggs this morning. Fletcher and Roy in the barn. My mom in the kitchen. A tractor that might run by end of week. The road northeast and whatever's up there. A door that's still open. That's the number I'm working with. One more thing. I almost forgot it, and then it came back. The morning of day 7, before anything had been confirmed, before Pete had gotten anything on the phone, before anyone was sure, I was sitting on the farmhouse porch in the pre-dawn dark with coffee and the .30-6 across my knees, just watching the driveway, listening. Darren came out and stood at the railing. He looked at the field and the dark sky. After a while, he said, "Do you think you'd have done anything differently?" I thought about it. "I would have called my mom sooner," I said. He nodded. He looked out at the field. "Me too," he said. "There's always someone you should have called sooner." We stood there until the light came, and then Cincinnati was on the radio, and it started. The door is open. We're still here. That's what I did in 7 days.